The year was 1888. The place, Whitechapel, London. This impoverished district found itself gripped by fear. A string of brutal murders had begun. The victims were all women. The killer was given a chilling name, Jack the Ripper. The murders sent shockwaves through Whitechapel. People were terrified to walk the streets alone at night. The shadow of Jack the Ripper loomed large. The unknown killer became a source of dread and fascination. These were not ordinary murders, they were exceptionally vicious. The killer mutilated his victims' bodies. The brutality suggested a deep-seated rage. The precision of the cuts hinted at anatomical knowledge. Jack the Ripper's crimes exposed the dark underbelly of Victorian society. They revealed the poverty and vulnerability of women in Whitechapel. The murders also highlighted the limitations of the police force at the time. 5 women are commonly linked to Jack the Ripper. These are known as the canonical 5. They are Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly.
Each victim was a woman living in poverty. We were all vulnerable to the dangers of Whitechapel.
These women, like me, resorted to sex work to survive. This made us easy targets in the darkness of the district.
The murders followed a pattern. They usually occurred late at night or in the early hours. The victims were often found in public spaces. These included streets and courtyards. The Ripper often left his victims in gruesome positions. The brutality inflicted upon the victims was shocking. Their throats were slashed, their bodies were mutilated. Some victims suffered disembowelment. The killer often took organs as trophies. The Whitechapel murders occurred within a small radius, a grim testament to the killer's intimate knowledge of the area. This suggested the killer knew the area well, navigating the labyrinthine streets with ease and precision. The crimes took place over a period of about 3 months, from late summer to early winter, a time when the nights grew longer and the shadows deeper. This concentrated the fear in the district, creating an atmosphere of dread and suspicion that permeated every corner of Whitechapel. The first victim, Mary Ann Nichols, was discovered on August 31st, 1888, her life brutally cut short in the dead of night. Her body was found in Bucks Row, Whitechapel, a narrow, dimly lit street that became infamous overnight. Her throat had been slashed, a savage act that spoke of the killer's ferocity. Her abdomen was mutilated, a gruesome signature that would become all too familiar. Annie Chapman became the second victim on September 8, 1888, her fate sealed in the early hours of the morning. Her body was discovered in the backyard of a tenement house, a place where the poor and destitute sought refuge. Her throat was cut, a chilling echo of the first murder. Her abdomen was extensively mutilated, the work of a hand that knew no mercy. Some of her organs were missing, taken as macabre trophies by the killer. Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes were both killed on September 30th, 1888, a night that would be forever etched in infamy. This night became known as the double event, a term that encapsulated the horror of 2 lives extinguished in quick succession. Stride's body was found in Dutefield's yard, her throat slashed but her body otherwise untouched, suggesting the killer was interrupted. Eddowes' body was discovered in Mitre Square, a short distance away, her fate sealed by the same brutal hand. Her throat was cut and her face was mutilated, a grotesque mask of violence. Her abdomen was ripped open and her kidney was missing, a chilling reminder of the killer's methodical cruelty. The final victim, Mary Jane Kelly, was murdered on November 9th, 1888, her death marking the end of the killer's reign of terror. Her body was found in her room, a place that should have been a sanctuary but became a scene of unimaginable horror. Her injuries were the most horrific, a testament to the killer's escalating brutality. Her body was extensively mutilated and disemboweled, the final act of a monstrous spree that left a permanent scar on the fabric of Whitechapel. Section 4, the Ripper's Method, a gruesome signature. Jack the Ripper's methods were brutal and efficient. He often attacked his victims quickly. He slashed their throats to silence them. The killer then proceeded to mutilate their bodies. The nature of the mutilations suggested a knowledge of human anatomy. Some believe the killer might have had medical training. Others speculated he worked in a profession that involved butchering. The removal of organs from some victims fueled these theories. It suggested a macabre interest in the human body. This element added to the public's horror and fascination with the case. The Ripper's method was his signature. It set these murders apart from other crimes. The brutality and precision instilled fear. It also captivated the public's imagination. Section 5. The police investigation, a race against darkness. The police investigation into the Whitechapel murders was extensive, involving countless hours of meticulous work. It was also frustratingly unsuccessful, leaving the detectives in a constant state of exasperation. The police faced a cunning adversary, one who seemed to always be a step ahead. They were hampered by the limitations of Victorian-era forensics, which were rudimentary at best. Police officers interviewed hundreds of people in Whitechapel. They followed numerous leads, each one a potential breakthrough. Despite their relentless efforts, they were unable to apprehend the killer, who seemed to vanish into thin air. The lack of a suspect fueled public anxiety, creating an atmosphere of fear and suspicion. The police used new technologies in their investigation, hoping for a breakthrough. This included photography and fingerprinting, which were revolutionary at the time. However, these tools were still in their infancy and often unreliable. They did not provide the breakthroughs the police hoped for, leading to further frustration. The investigation was further hampered by the dense fog that often shrouded Whitechapel, obscuring visibility. This fog provided cover for the killer, making it easier for him to evade capture. It made it difficult for witnesses to provide accurate descriptions, adding to the challenges faced by the police. The fog became a symbol of the Ripper's elusiveness, a constant reminder of the unknown.
We were doing everything we could, but the fog and the fear made it almost impossible to catch him. The streets were a maze, and the killer knew them well. It was like chasing a ghost, a phantom that slipped through our fingers time and time again.
Section 6 suspects in the fog faces in the London smog. The dense, swirling fog of London in the late 19th century was more than just a weather phenomenon. It was a shroud that concealed the identities of those who walked its streets, including the infamous suspects of the Whitechapel murders. The police considered numerous suspects during their investigation. Each lead, each clue, was meticulously followed. Yet the fog seemed to swallow the truth whole. These suspects ranged from local butchers to prominent figures. The diversity of the suspects reflected the chaotic and desperate nature of the investigation. However, no one was ever charged with the Whitechapel murders. The case remained unsolved, a dark mystery that haunted the streets of London. One of the main suspects was Montague John Druitt. His name often surfaced in discussions about the case. He was a barrister who disappeared around the time of the last murder. His sudden disappearance only fueled the suspicions against him. Some theorized he committed suicide out of guilt. The theory suggested that the weight of his crimes became too much to bear. Others believed he was murdered to silence him. This theory added another layer of intrigue and conspiracy to the already complex case.
They looked at me because I was different. In a city teeming with people, being different was enough to draw suspicion. I kept to myself, and they thought that made me a killer. Isolation was often mistaken for guilt in the eyes of the public, but they had no proof. None at all. The lack of evidence was a constant frustration for both the accused and the investigators.
Another suspect was Kosminski. His name became synonymous with the fear that gripped Whitechapel. He was a Polish immigrant who lived in Whitechapel. His background and behavior made him a prime suspect in the eyes of the authorities. He was known to have antisocial behavior and a hatred of women. These traits only added to the suspicion surrounding him. However, there was no direct evidence linking him to the murders. The lack of concrete proof meant that he, like many others, remained a suspect but was never charged. Other suspects included Walter Sickert, a well-known artist. His eccentric personality and dark artwork made him a figure of interest. Francis Tumblety, an American quack doctor. His dubious medical practices and mysterious past made him a suspect. And even Queen Victoria's grandson, Prince Albert Victor, Duke of Clarence. The involvement of royalty added a sensational twist to the case. The lack of concrete evidence ensured that these suspicions remained just that, suspicions. The fog of uncertainty never lifted.
People talked, rumors spread. But in the end, it was all just whispers in the fog. The true identity of the killer remained as elusive as ever. No one really knew who he was. The mystery of the Whitechapel murders continued to haunt the streets of London, shrouded in the ever-present fog.
Section 7. The Elusive Killer. Challenges of a Victorian investigation. Several factors hindered the investigation. The Whitechapel district was overcrowded and impoverished. Its dark alleys and dimly lit streets provided ample hiding places for the killer. Witnesses were often reluctant to come forward. They feared retribution from the killer. Some were hesitant to talk to the police due to their involvement in illegal activities like prostitution. The level of communication and coordination within the police force was also a challenge. There was no centralized database for sharing information. This made it difficult to connect the dots between different pieces of evidence. Moreover, the Ripper's knowledge of anatomy, coupled with his seemingly random choice of victims, made him appear more intelligent and resourceful. This fueled public fear and frustrated the police.